Today we're on week 3 of our sermon series and our study opportunities related around the mysterious pathways of joy. We've looked at the mysterious pathway of joy that's found through grace and even through adversity. And today we're looking at one that might hit a little too close to home for some of us, but we're looking at the mysterious pathway of joy that's found through simplicity. I've shared before that I watch a lot of television and always have. And I got caught up in some of the reality TV shows, things like Hoarders, that show how somebody could take a simple hobby and suddenly own everything in the world. It just fills their house from floor to ceiling. It also makes you very disturbed as to why grown men own so many Beanie Babies. But Beanie Babies seem to be the investment tool for a lot of people out there. And then you have to clean all that stuff out because your home gets condemned. Some of us aren't quite at the hoarder state. So we like Maria Kondo and the art of tidying up, where it's just going through our houses and helping us realize that now we have not only one closet in our bedroom with clothing, but now we have another closet down the hall. Or if our children are grown and out of the house, we've now filled their closets with our clothing. And it's amazing, and all the stuff that we just accumulate in life. But there comes a point where, if we're honest, stuff doesn't bring us joy. And so, this seems to be a new concept to us, that we need to be a little more simple, that simplicity can bring us joy, but it's really not new. It's really one of the most ancient concepts, especially in the Christian faith.
Absolutely. It goes back to the earliest times, and so many of the early church fathers, the desert leaders were there, and they wanted to be away from Rome and
Right.
the trappings and the stuff, and they lived out in the desert without anything.
Mm-hmm. Just them and God.
That's right.
Or you look at St. Francis, which most people have heard of. St. Francis was from a very well-to-do family, second or third son, and one day he simply walked away from all of it and dedicated his life to God. Left all that money, all that stuff behind, and lived his life in a completely different way, a very simple way. And I think as we look throughout the Christian tradition, we see that. We see that in John Wesley as well, the way he lived his life.
Yeah, and St. Francis, I mean, the orders that he founded, the Franciscans,
Right.
The Poor Clares,
Right.
They still exist, and people still have chosen to walk that pathway that he did. I mean, he would sleep in caves, in old houses that had been abandoned. He really didn't want the burden of things, and found a great relief. But his family could not understand what was going on.
No.
Because who in their right mind would abandon all that wealth? And his father named him Francis because they lived in Italy, but he was intrigued with the trade that he did in France, and he was a merchant that traded everywhere, and so he named Francis after France because he wanted to be that sort of cosmopolitan person of the world, and so why would his son walk away from all that? It just confused him. And I guess the same thing happened really with the Wesleys at Oxford, as they were surrounded by the up and coming of England, but chose to live very simple lives as well.
Right. Yeah. John, when he became a fellow at Oxford College, he was paid a very small amount of money. It wasn't a lot. He was very low on the rungs of the ladder in the educational world there, and so he sat down and he figured out his monthly bills and what he needed to live on for a year, and he determined that he only needed a certain amount. I mean, it's all he needed for food, it's all he needed for lodging, it's all he needed for clothing, and then he had the rest that he could give away.
Right, and it's somewhat like all of us do when you get to that first job. You've lived on the cheap for so long.
Oh, yeah.
That all of a sudden you've got this massive amount of money. I mean, everyone else's world, it's not that much.
No,
But
to
in your
you,
world,
yeah.
it's like
Yeah.
more than you've ever had. And John found himself there. I mean,
Right.
he'd been one of 19 children.
Yeah.
And so he had never really had very much money of his own, and suddenly he had all this money, but he chose to do something very different than
Right.
most people did.
Well, and one of the things that led him to that was he bought furnishings for his room, and he improved his furnishings for his room. And within a week or so, he encountered some people who were struggling because they didn't have food, and he didn't have the money to give them to help them get food because he had bought furniture. And that overwhelmed him, was that he had furniture that was sufficient, but he had now nicer furniture. But because of his nicer furniture, he couldn't help someone.
Yeah.
And so the rest of his life, no matter how much he made, and truly when you look at the economic standards of that day, you do the translation of the money, he made a fortune through the selling of the tracts he would write and through donations and through his preaching and all of that. He made a lot of money, but he still lived off the most meager amount because he would rather give it to someone and have them be able to use it for food or for warmth than for him to have just something else to clutter up a closet or to sit on a shelf. That wasn't necessary. Now, his parents didn't understand what he was doing either. His mother wrote him one of the harshest letters that Susanna ever wrote John, was when she found out that he had stopped wearing a wig of any sort. This was in the days of powdered wigs. And, only the uncouth wore your own hair. But John figured out that to have a powdered wig, you have to send it out to get it powdered. And when that one's out to get it powdered, you have to own another powdered wig that you also have to keep powdered. And he said he will not put the food from someone's stomach on his head in powder. And so he started tying his own hair back and just wearing his own hair rather than going and having powdered wigs made. And his mother was irate, but I think she finally came around to understand that what he was doing was worth far more than just being stylish.
Yeah, and there's that moment, I think, for many people who, for whatever reason, they've chosen to become more simple in their life. And actually, St. Francis had a very similar experience, at least in some of the stories, that what pushed him over the edge was he met someone who had nothing to eat, and he too couldn't give them. And he had to take that moment to pause and say, I have stuff, but I don't realize don't have enough to give someone who's truly starving.
Right.
And so there's moments that we do that. Now, the three of us are Methodist pastors, and so we have a somewhat unique experience with stuff.
We do.
Because for me, there was that moment when I became United Methodist. We had a 4-bedroom house, 3-bath, full garage, and we had this big yard sale, and we sold everything, and we gave away everything, and we put what was left on a U-Haul, and we moved into a house that had all of the bedrooms furnished. The dining room was better furniture than we had. The living room, and so we were very excited about this, but we suddenly found ourselves owning very little, and I'm sure y'all have had similar experiences with that.
Oh, absolutely. Everything you own has to be able to go on a truck every 2, 3, 4, 5 years, whatever it is. It all has to go on a truck.
Longer and longer.
We hope it's longer and longer that you don't have to do this. But yes, you're always asking that question because ultimately you're looking at something and asking, do I want to move this?
Right.
When you buy anything we buy, we always ask that question of, do I want to move this? Or how hard would this be to move? We don't take up hobbies that take up a lot of space because we might have space in this house. We may not have space in the next one. No workshop at the next house. And so then it's really hard to talk your wife into letting you put, the table saw in the dining room.
Right.
It doesn't go over well. And so you're always asking that question. And you're even going through your stuff every so often because you never know when the spring might roll around that your stuff goes back on a truck.
Right.
Yeah, so you always are doing that kind of cleaning.
Now, do y'all have the same odd moment around January the 1st, maybe the 5th of January, after Epiphany the 6th, where you're putting your Christmas stuff away? What happens for y'all?
Oh, that's when you sit down and you have the conversation as a family of, well, how do we think it's going? Do we think we're moving this
Is
year?
it looking good?
Is it looking good? Are
Yeah.
we feeling like we're going to be moving? Because that determines what you're about to do when you put your Christmas decorations away.
That's right.
Because what's your choices at that point, Sherry?
Tissue or bubble wrap.
That's right. If you think you're going to still be in that same house next year, just wrap it up in tissue paper, all those glass ornaments, and
Even
put them
paper
away.
towels.
Paper towels
Yeah.
will
Oh, yeah,
work.
yeah,
That's
yeah.
right.
Yeah, plastic
You
plastic
can even
Walmart
just
bags,
you can
yeah.
even just carefully stack them
Mhm.
and put them away. But if you think you're moving, it's time to wrap them all up in
And
bubble
you got to
wrap.
get the good boxes. Too.
Got to get the good boxes. Go ahead and tape it
Yeah.
and get everything labeled.
well
Oh,
printed labels, not just
Absolute-
written on the
no,
side.
No.
but a
You
nice
print those
label.
labels
Yeah,
out because it's got to go on the truck.
Exactly.
And it also gives you that chance to clean out all those odd Christmas items that you've accumulated that you
In
really
4
don't
years, it's still in a box.
you don't know why you have it or where it came from, and so you clean it out. So I think we are unique in that we get forced into some simplicity on occasions, but I don't know. It's really hard because you just end up every day of the year, it seems like you add one new thing
Yeah.
into your life if you're not careful.
Absolutely. You know, when my wife and I were blessed to go to a Christian liberal arts college, and we had a professor that said something that really changed kind of how we have approached life, and we're blessed to hear it early enough in life that it really changed us. And he said, "Don't buy stuff, but buy memories."
Mm-hmm.
And we've taken that to heart, and we've been blessed to get to take our kids to a lot of different places and see a lot of the world. And I feel bad because there's not a lot of stuff. You
Yeah.
know, there's not a lot of heirlooms that they're going
Right.
to inherit, or lake places and that kind of thing. And it would be wonderful, but we've really invested in a different way. But it's also freeing
Right.
because what I watched with my father, he had a piece of property on the lake, and he spent so much of his time worrying about this property when he was here, and then if he went to the lake, he worried about that property over there, and so there was always this worry that something had to be taken care of. The boat was the water was too low. The boat was going to tear up. Did we leave the stove on at the house back in town? And so there was always this sort of possession that happened. The possessions possessed him in many ways, and there was a joy. There was also a lot of worry that happens with possessions, and I think that's what Wesley and St. Francis discovered. You get rid of those,
Right.
and you don't have the
Right.
worry that goes with it, and then joy sort of finds you.
Well, and the Heath brothers in their book, The Power of the Moment, they're talking about the fact that you don't find joy in life through the things that you buy and through all that you possess, but you find joy in the moments. That moment of going somewhere with your family, that simple moment of, when we've had odd times when the power's been out and we have access to nothing because for some reason where we live, the power just seems to go out. Bright sunshiny
random.
day,
Yeah.
just goes out. And suddenly where we can all be scattered in the house, suddenly we're all in the same room and maybe we're watching a movie on an iPad. So we've now brought everything down to an 8-inch screen. And we're all sitting in the dark with a candle somewhere, watching an 8-inch screen, watching a Disney movie or something like that, and laughing and just enjoying being together. And it's truly not costing us anything because we're not even running power in our house at that point. And it's not about stuff. It's amazing how you find joy in those simple things, but when we complicate it,
Yeah.
it seems that joy just can get very elusive.
And I think we've all had the moment where we've bought the present for the kids and they play with the box and
Right.
completely
Yeah.
ignore what came in the
yeah.
box, but the
Right.
joy came in the box
Yeah.
instead of the stuff.
Yeah.
It's so often the free stuff that really can bring joy that we forget about. We love to go to parks and take a bike, or I like to kayak.
Yeah.
Once you buy a bicycle and a kayak, well, there's really no cost to it. There's no, you're just out in the woods, you're out alone, and or you're at a park with a dog, And that's not something that you have to possess. You don't have to maintain it. You don't have to own it. But it can certainly bring joy. And I think what we find in Scripture and we find in the history of the Christian tradition is that that kind of simplicity is one of the mysterious pathways that brings joy.
Absolutely.
And sometimes God even reminds you of it. Because unlike you guys, I was second career, so we had accumulated a lot of stuff. And when we were blessed to move into the parsonage here, which was built in 1952 and has very small closets, I had to buy a stand-up wardrobe for my clothes. And that was a very sobering moment for me that I had to buy essentially an extra closet because I had too much stuff.
Wow.
And then when I prayed about my prayer word for 2019, it was fasting. And I thought God was talking about, maybe a Wesley fast once a week, something like that. Nope. Fasting from buying clothes. I have not bought a single item of clothes since January the 1st.
Wow.
And if you talk to my husband, you will appreciate what that means.
Wow.
I tried
He
to...
seems a lot happier.
He does. I tried to convince God I did need a new Easter outfit. God was not, wouldn't go for it. Wouldn't go for it. But there is real truth in that, in the simplicity. Just taking Lily to a park. We don't have to take her to the zoo and pay $1 bazillion. Just, little kids, they understand it far better than we do.